My name is Maya Chen, and for 28 years, I've been the family disappointment who talks to flour. While my sister Sophia collected accolades and applause, I collected wild yeast cultures in mason jars on my kitchen counter. They called it an obsession, a phase, a waste of time that proved I'd never amount to anything substantial. What they didn't know was that my little hobby had quietly grown into something they couldn't have imagined in their wildest dreams. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning it all unraveled started like any other family gathering at my parents' sprawling colonial house in Westchester. I pulled into the circular driveway, my beat-up Honda Civic looking shabby next to the row of luxury cars already parked there. Sophia's silver Tesla gleamed in the front spot, naturally. She always arrived first to these monthly brunches, armed with fresh accomplishments and ready to hold court. I grabbed the canvas bag from my passenger seat, heavy with mason jars of sourdough starter I'd promised to bring for anyone interested. 3 months ago, I'd made the mistake of mentioning that I was giving away samples of my signature culture, lovingly named Beatrice. The family had erupted in laughter. Maya and her pet bacteria, they had said, always trying to make something out of nothing. The front door opened before I could knock. My mother, Linda, stood there in her perfectly pressed linen dress, her smile warm but strained around the edges. She always looked at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve, a daughter who'd somehow failed to follow the blueprint that had worked so brilliantly for Sophia. "Maya, sweetheart, you're just in time. Sophia's been telling us about the promotion." Her eyes drifted to my bag. "Please tell me you didn't bring those jars again." "Just a few samples, Mom. Aunt Rachel asked about them last time." I stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of expensive candles and fresh flowers. Everything in this house gleamed with the kind of perfection that had always made me feel like a smudge on clean glass. The dining room buzzed with conversation. My extended family had claimed their usual spots around the mahogany table, coffee cups raised, faces animated as they hung on Sophia's every word. She sat at the head of the table, her auburn hair perfectly styled, wearing a cream blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. At 26, she was already a senior marketing director at a Fortune 500 company, and she wore her success like expensive perfume that announced her presence before she entered a room. "Maya!" my cousin Derek called out, waving me over. "Come hear about Sophia's latest conquest. She just landed the Henderson Industries account." I slipped into the empty chair near the corner, the one that always seemed reserved for me, close enough to participate, but far enough away to avoid drawing attention. Sophia's eyes found mine across the table, her smile sharp and knowing. "It's really nothing," she said with practiced modesty, though her voice carried across the room. "It's just a $12 million campaign for their new product line. The client specifically requested me after seeing my work on the Morrison project." The table erupted in congratulations. My father, Robert, raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "To Sophia, who keeps raising the bar for this family." "Speech! Speech!" my uncle called out, and others joined in. Sophia laughed, the sound light and musical, before standing gracefully. "I'm just grateful for the opportunities I've been given. Success isn't about luck, it's about dedication, vision, and refusing to settle for mediocrity. It's about pursuing goals that matter, that make a real impact in the world." Her eyes met mine again across the table, and I felt the familiar sting of her words. We both knew what she meant. While she climbed corporate ladders and impressed clients, I spent my days covered in flour, talking to fermented dough like it was a living thing. My Aunt Margaret leaned forward, her voice filled with admiration. "Sophia, dear, you've always had such drive, such ambition. It's inspiring to see someone your age making such meaningful contributions." "Thank you, Aunt Margaret. I believe in setting high standards and not apologizing for excellence." Sophia settled back into her chair, accepting the wave of praise that followed her words. I sipped my coffee, letting the conversation wash over me like a familiar tide. This was how it always went. Sophia's achievements became the centerpiece, the standard by which everything else was measured, and everything else, particularly my choices, always came up short. My cousin Jennifer, always eager to keep the spotlight on Sophia, leaned in with curiosity. "Tell us about the celebration dinner. I heard it was at Le Bernardin." "The client insisted," Sophia replied with a modest shrug. "They wanted to celebrate properly. It was lovely, though I have to admit after meals like that, I appreciate simple, authentic food even more. There's something to be said for craftsmanship, real skill in creating something from basic ingredients." I nearly choked on my coffee. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I kept my expression neutral. Around the table, heads nodded in appreciation of Sophia's refined palate and her ability to find meaning in every experience. My mother, sensing an opportunity, turned towards me. "Speaking of simple foods, Maya, are you still playing around with that bread project of yours?" The word playing hit like a small slap. 20 years of dedicated learning, countless hours perfecting fermentation schedules, mastering hydration ratios, and understanding the complex science of wild yeast cultivation reduced to playing around. "I'm still baking," I said quietly, my fingers tightening around my coffee cup. Derek grinned, shaking his head.
Maya and her sourdough obsession. Remember when we were kids, she used to collect leaves and rocks. Now it's bacteria cultures. Some things never change. Laughter rippled around the table. Gentle, but pointed. I felt heat creep up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. It's a bit more complex than that, but yes, I'm still working with sourdough. Working with it how? My uncle pressed, genuinely curious. I mean, what do you actually do with it besides bake bread for yourself? Before I could answer, Sophia jumped in, her voice bright with what sounded like sisterly concern. Maya's been trying to turn her hobby into something more substantial for years now. She's very passionate about it, which I admire. Sometimes I worry she's too focused on this one thing, though. The world has moved so far beyond artisanal everything. People want convenience, efficiency. They don't have time to wait 3 days for bread to rise. Murmurs of agreement followed her words. My father nodded thoughtfully. Sophia has a point. In today's economy, you need to think bigger, faster, find where the real opportunities are. Besides, my cousin Michael added, there's a bakery on every corner now. Everyone's trying to be artisanal. It's oversaturated. I felt the familiar weight settling on my chest, the same feeling I'd carried since childhood, when Sophia's logic made my dreams seem foolish and small. But this time, something else stirred beneath the disappointment, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. "You might be right," I said softly, and I could see satisfaction flicker across several faces. They thought I was conceding, acknowledging the wisdom of their practical concerns. Sophia reached across the table and patted my hand, her touch gentle but condescending. "Maya, you have so many talents. You could do anything you put your mind to. Maybe it's time to consider something with more growth potential. I could put in a word at my company. They're always looking for detail-oriented people." "That's generous of you, Sophia." I pulled my hand back slowly, keeping my voice level. "I'm pretty committed to my current path." "Current path?" My father's eyebrows rose. "What path is that exactly? Selling bread at farmers markets?" The question hung in the air, and I could feel everyone waiting for my answer. This was the moment they expected me to admit defeat, to acknowledge that my dreams were too small for their standards. Instead, I took a sip of coffee and smiled. Something like that. The conversation moved on, flowing back to safer topics. Sophia's upcoming business trip to Chicago, Derek's new apartment in Manhattan, my cousin's engagement plans. I let their voices fade into background noise while I watched them. These people who thought they knew everything about my life but had never bothered to ask the right questions. My phone buzzed against my leg. A text from my business partner, James, lit up the screen. Board meeting confirmed for Thursday. Investors want to discuss the expansion timeline for locations 15 to 20. Also, Food Network called back about the documentary. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and returned my attention to the table, where Sophia was now holding court about her insights into consumer behavior and market trends. She spoke with such authority about industries and demographics, analyzing everything with the sharp precision that had made her so successful in corporate America. The key is understanding what people really want, not what they say they want, but what they'll actually pay for. Authenticity is nice in theory, but convenience wins every time. My aunt nodded eagerly. Exactly! That's why you've done so well, Sophia. You understand the real world, not just idealistic dreams. Dreams are important, Sophia conceded graciously, but they need to be grounded in reality. Take Maya's bread fascination. It's wonderful that she's passionate about it, but passion doesn't pay bills or build a future. I felt all eyes turn toward me again, waiting to see how I'd respond to this gentle dismantling of my life choices. The old Maya would have shrunken to her chair, would have mumbled something about it just being a hobby anyway. But that Maya had changed somewhere along the way, shaped by early morning deliveries and late night sessions and the quiet satisfaction of building something real from nothing more than flour, water, and time. You are absolutely right about understanding what people want, I said, meeting Sophia's gaze directly. And you're right about dreams needing to be grounded in reality. Sophia smiled, thinking she'd won another small victory in our lifelong competition. I'm glad you see that, Maya. It's never too late to redirect your energy towards something more practical. Oh, I'm very practical these days. I reached for my canvas bag and pulled out one of the mason jars, setting it gently on the table. This is Beatrice. She's about 4 years old now, descended from a starter I caught in the wild in Vermont. She's seen me through a lot of changes.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
A few people leaned forward politely, though I could see the barely concealed eye rolls. Derek chuckled. Maya, you talk about that thing like it's alive. In a way, she is. Wild yeast is a living ecosystem. It responds to temperature, humidity, the minerals in your water, the proteins in your flour. She's taught me more about patience and consistency than any business course ever could. That's lovely, dear, my mother said in the tone she used when humoring children. But what Derek means is that maybe it's time to think about more conventional career goals. I unscrewed the jar's lid, and the sharp, tangy aroma of mature sourdough filled the air. Some noses wrinkled, but I noticed my uncle lean in with genuine curiosity. The thing about Beatrice, I continued, is that she's not just a pet or a hobby. She's been the foundation of everything I've built. Every loaf, every croissant, every innovation has started with her. Innovation? Sophia's voice carried a note of amusement. In bread? You'd be surprised how much innovation happens in kitchens. Take lamination techniques for croissants, or the hydration ratios that create perfect crumb structure, or the fermentation schedules that develop complex flavors over days instead of hours. There's an entire science behind what most people think is just mixing and baking. My father drummed his fingers on the table, his patience wearing thin. Maya, this is all very interesting, but what's your point? Are you trying to convince us that playing with dough is equivalent to running a real business? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I looked around the table at these familiar faces, people who had watched me grow up but had never really seen me. They were waiting for me to back down, to admit that their practical concerns were valid and my dreams were just elaborate fantasies. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I got a call yesterday from Marcus Williams. Do you know who that is? Blank stares met my question. I wasn't surprised. They might know corporate executives and marketing directors, but they didn't know the culinary world. He's the executive chef at Le Bernardin, the same restaurant where you celebrated your promotion, Sophia. A flicker of interest crossed her face. And he wants to discuss sourcing bread for their lunch service. Apparently, they've been following my work. I scrolled through my messages until I found the email chain. He mentioned something about consistency and quality that matches their standards. The table went quiet. This wasn't the response they'd expected from their family's resident dreamer. My cousin Jennifer leaned forward. Wait, Le Bernardin? The Le Bernardin? They want to buy your bread? They want to explore a partnership, I corrected, along with 11 other restaurants in the city. It's been a busy month. Sophia's perfectly composed expression showed the first crack of uncertainty. That's wonderful, Maya, but one-off contracts aren't the same as building a sustainable business. Restaurants are notoriously difficult clients. You're absolutely right, I agreed. That's why I stopped focusing on individual restaurant accounts 6 months ago. It's too inconsistent, too dependent on other people's success. My mother set down her coffee cup. What do you mean you stopped focusing on restaurants? I looked around the table at these people who thought they knew my story, who had spent years categorizing me as the impractical dreamer whose hobby would never amount to anything real. The moment felt surreal, like I was about to reveal a secret identity I'd been hiding in plain sight. I mean, I shifted my focus to wholesale distribution and direct-to-consumer sales. It's more scalable, more predictable, better profit margins too. The silence stretched longer this time. Derek cleared his throat. Maya, are you saying you actually have a business? Like, a real business? Define real, I said, with a small smile. Revenue, my father said bluntly. Employees, growth projections. The metrics that determine whether something is a hobby or a viable enterprise. I nodded slowly. Fair metrics. Let's see. Last quarter, we hit $1.2 million in revenue. We're on track to close this year at just over $5 million. We employ 43 people across 4 locations with plans to open 6 more by next spring. The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples of shock that spread across every face at the table.
Sophia's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. 4 locations? My aunt whispered. Maya, what are you talking about? You live in that tiny apartment in Brooklyn. I do live in Brooklyn, I confirmed, about 6 blocks from our flagship bakery. It made sense to stay close to the operation, especially during the expansion phase. My father leaned forward, his business instincts overriding his shock. Maya, are you telling us you own multiple bakeries? I prefer to think of them as production facilities with retail components, Brooklyn, Queens, and 2 in New Jersey so far. The Manhattan location opens next month. Jennifer's voice came out as barely more than a squeak. How is that possible? We never knew. You never said anything. Nobody ever asked, I replied simply. And honestly, I wasn't sure how to bring it up. Every time I mentioned baking, it got dismissed as cute but impractical, so I stopped mentioning it. The admission hung heavy in the air. I could see the discomfort on their faces as they processed not just the information, but the realization that they had fundamentally misunderstood my life for years. Sophia found her voice first, though it sounded strained. Maya, I don't understand. If this is true, if you really have built something this substantial, why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were just struggling? Was I struggling? I asked. Or were you just not paying attention to what I was actually doing? The question hit its mark. I could see recognition dawning on several faces as they remembered dismissive comments, condescending advice, assumptions they had made without ever asking for details. My uncle cleared his throat. Maya, forgive me, but this is a lot to process. $5 million? That's not small business territory. That's serious entrepreneurship. The numbers don't lie, I said, though I have to admit the growth has been overwhelming sometimes. We're in talks with 3 different investor groups about expansion funding. Apparently, there's more demand for what we do than I initially projected. What exactly do you do? My mother asked, and for the first time in years, she sounded like she genuinely wanted to know the answer.
I gestured to the mason jars still sitting open on the table. We start with Beatrice and her sisters. I maintain about 12 different starter cultures, each with its own characteristics. Some are better for pastries, others for hearty bread, some specifically for gluten-free applications. Each one requires daily care, specific feeding schedules, temperature control. The table listened with new attention as I continued. From there, we produce everything from classic sourdough loaves to laminated pastries, specialty items for dietary restrictions, and custom products for wholesale clients. We supply coffee shops, restaurants, grocery chains, and direct consumers. Grocery chains? Derek's voice cracked slightly on the words. Whole Foods carries our products in 15 locations. We're in negotiations to expand to 47 stores across 3 states. I paused, watching their faces process this information. We also have a subscription service for home delivery. About 3,000 regular customers so far. The silence that followed felt different from the earlier quiet. This wasn't dismissal or polite tolerance. This was shock. Recalibration, the kind of stunned processing that happens when your entire understanding of a situation gets turned upside down. Sophia's face had gone pale, but she managed to find words. Maya, I owe you an apology. We all do. I had no idea you were building something like this. How could you have known? I asked, not unkindly. Every time I brought up baking, someone changed the subject or made a joke about my flour obsession. After a while, I stopped trying to explain. My father ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood when he was trying to solve a difficult problem. Maya, honey, I'm trying to understand. If you've built this successful business, why didn't you correct us when we assumed you were just playing around? The question deserved an honest answer. I thought about all the family gatherings, all the gentle suggestions that I consider a more practical career, all the conversations where my achievements were minimized or overlooked entirely, because I realized that your approval wasn't actually necessary for my success. I was so tired of justifying my choices to people who had already decided they weren't worth taking seriously. So I stopped justifying them and focused on proving them instead. The words carried more weight than I'd intended. I could see my family processing not just the business information, but the emotional truth behind my silence. They were beginning to understand that their dismissiveness had created distance, that their assumptions had cost them years of knowing who I really was. My Aunt Margaret spoke first, her voice small. Maya, we've been horrible, haven't we? All these years of treating your passion like a phase you'd outgrow. Not horrible, I said gently, just not curious. There's a difference between someone who can't succeed and someone whose success you're not paying attention to. Jennifer leaned forward, her eyes bright with newfound interest. Tell us everything. How did you start? How did you grow it so big without us knowing? I smiled, feeling some of the old warmth return to the room. It started exactly how you think it did. Me, Beatrice, and a tiny kitchen in Brooklyn. I was selling loaves at the farmer's market, just like Dad guessed. But I was also paying attention to what people wanted, what they couldn't find elsewhere. Such as, Sophia asked, and I could hear genuine curiosity in her voice now. Consistency without compromise. Most artisanal bakeries are inconsistent because they're small operations without systems. Most commercial bakeries are consistent, but use shortcuts that sacrifice quality. I figured out how to scale artisanal techniques without losing what makes them special. My father's business mind was clearly engaged now. That's the kind of differentiation that builds market share. How did you solve the scaling problem? For the first time in years, I had their complete attention. Not polite tolerance or gentle mockery, but genuine interest in what I had to say. It felt strange and wonderful and a little overwhelming. Temperature control systems, fermentation scheduling software, standardized starter maintenance protocols, I explained. I treat each bakery location like a controlled laboratory. Every variable that affects quality gets measured, tracked, and optimized. Software? Derek looked impressed despite himself. You developed software for bakeries? James and I did. He's my business partner, handles the technical side.
We met when I was trying to solve consistency problems across multiple locations. Turned out, he'd been working on similar challenges for other food production businesses. James? My mother asked. James Morrison, MIT graduate, food science background. He saw what I was doing with fermentation control and realized it could revolutionize small-scale food production. I pulled up a photo on my phone showing James and me in front of our newest location. He handles systems and operations. I handled product development and quality control. Sophia studied the photo with new eyes. Maya, he looks familiar. James Morrison. Wasn't he featured in that article about food tech innovations? I nodded. Forbes, about 6 months ago. The piece about entrepreneurs using technology to solve traditional food challenges. We were one of 4 companies they profiled. Forbes! My father's voice carried a note of awe that I'd never heard directed at my accomplishments before. The exposure helped with investor interest, I said. Apparently, what we're doing fits into some larger trends around food production and distribution. I don't understand all the market analysis, but James says we're positioned well for significant growth. The conversation that followed felt surreal. For 30 minutes, I found myself fielding questions about revenue projections, expansion timelines, production capacity, and market positioning. These were the same people who had spent years treating my baking as a charming but impractical hobby, and now they were asking about profit margins and competitive advantages. But as we talked, I could see something else happening. The family dynamic that had held steady for decades was shifting, recalibrating around new information that changed everything they thought they knew about me. Sophia, in particular, seemed to be struggling with this new reality. She kept asking detailed questions, as if she were trying to find some flaw in my story, some indication that I was exaggerating or misunderstanding my own success. Maya, she said finally, I'm still trying to process this. You're telling us that while I've been celebrating promotion to senior director, you've been building a multi-million-dollar business. How is that possible without anyone knowing? The question revealed more than she probably intended. For the first time, I could hear uncertainty in her voice, the crack in the confidence that had always made her the family's undisputed success story. It's possible, I said gently, because success isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet and steady and focused on building something sustainable rather than impressive. The distinction hung in the air between us. For years, our family had celebrated Sophia's achievements because they were visible, prestigious, easy to understand and brag about. My success had been invisible to them because it didn't fit their definition of what achievement looked like. My uncle broke the tension by asking about specific business details, and soon the conversation flowed back to safer ground. But I could feel the shift that had occurred, the way the room's energy had changed now that they saw me differently. As the morning wore on, people began to leave for other obligations. Derek had a golf game, Jennifer needed to pick up her kids, my parents had dinner plans with friends. But before anyone could escape, my phone rang with a call that would seal the transformation of this family gathering. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my heart skip. I should take this, I said, stepping away from the table. Maya Chen speaking. Ms. Chen, this is Patricia Volkov from Cascade Capital Partners. We spoke last week about the expansion financing. I could feel my family's eyes on me as I moved toward the window for privacy. Yes, of course. Thank you for calling back so quickly. I have some news I thought you'd want to hear immediately. Our investment committee met yesterday to review your proposal. My stomach clenched. This was the call that would determine whether we could expand at the pace James and I had planned, whether we could capitalize on the momentum we'd built, or whether we'd need to slow down and grow more cautiously. The decision was unanimous, Patricia continued. We're prepared to offer $35 million in Series A funding with terms we think you'll find very favorable. The words hit me like a physical force. $35 million? More than James and I had dared to hope for. Enough to fund the expansion we dreamed about, and then some. That's incredible news, I managed. Thank you. We see tremendous potential in what you've built.
Your approach to scaling artisanal production could transform not just bakeries, but the entire specialty food industry. We'd like to schedule a meeting next week to discuss the details. After I hung up, I stood by the window for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Through the glass, I could see the perfectly manicured lawn where Sophia and I had played as children, where she had always been faster, smarter, more impressive in every way that mattered to our family. When I turned back to the table, everyone was watching me with expressions I'd never seen directed at me before: curiosity, respect, and something that looked almost like awe. "Everything okay?" my father asked. I walked back to my seat, my legs feeling slightly unsteady. "That was our lead investor. They've just approved our Series A funding round." Silence greeted this announcement, the kind of complete quiet that falls when people are trying to process information too big for immediate comprehension. "How much?" Sophia asked, her voice barely audible. I met her eyes across the table. $35 million. The silence stretched longer. Derek's coffee cup remained suspended halfway to his lips. My mother's hand pressed against her heart. My father stared at me like I'd just announced I was moving to Mars. Jennifer found her voice first. 35 million? Maya, what does that even mean? It means we can expand faster than we'd planned. 12 new locations instead of 6. Research and development funding for new products. The resources to build the kind of company James and I have been dreaming about. My Aunt Margaret leaned forward, her voice filled with wonder. "Maya, honey, are you saying you're now running a company worth tens of millions of dollars?" "The valuation is actually closer to 80 million post-investment," I said, the number still feeling surreal in my mouth. "But yes, I suppose that's what it means." Sophia had gone completely silent, her face pale and her hands folded tightly in her lap. For the first time in our lives, she had no words, no smooth response to regain control of the narrative. The family that had gathered that morning to celebrate her latest promotion was now processing the reality that their dismissive treatment of my little hobby had blinded them to one of the most significant business success stories they'd ever encountered personally. My father cleared his throat. "Maya, I owe you more than an apology. We all do. We've been incredibly short-sighted." "You couldn't have known what you weren't curious enough to ask about," I said, echoing my earlier point, but with less edge now. The vindication felt less important than the opportunity for genuine connection. "But we should have asked," my mother said, her voice thick with regret. "We should have paid attention. We should have supported you instead of dismissing what you were passionate about." The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd had as a family. For the first time, they asked real questions about my work, my challenges, my goals. They listened when I explained the technical aspects of fermentation science, the complexity of scaling food production, the satisfaction of building something from scratch. Sophia eventually found her voice again, but she sounded different, smaller, less certain. "Maya, I've been thinking about what I said earlier, about authenticity not mattering, about people wanting convenience over quality. I think I was wrong." "You weren't wrong about market forces," I replied. "You were just thinking about them differently than I was. You focused on what people say they want in surveys and focus groups. I focused on what they're actually willing to pay premium prices for when they find it. The difference between stated preferences and revealed preferences," my father said, his business education kicking in. "That's sophisticated market analysis, Maya." It was strange to be acknowledged for business acumen by people who had never seen me as anything but an impractical dreamer. But it also felt like the beginning of a different kind of relationship with my family, one based on who I actually was rather than who they assumed I was. As the afternoon wound down and people prepared to leave, Sophia approached me privately. She looked vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before, stripped of the confidence that had always defined her. "Maya, I need to say something, and I need you to really hear it." Her voice was quiet, serious. "I've spent my whole life being the successful one in this family. It's been my identity, my role, the thing that made me special. And I've used that position to make you feel small, to dismiss your dreams, to position myself as the practical one and you as the unrealistic one." I waited, sensing there was more she needed to say. Discovering today that you've built something so much bigger than anything I've achieved, it's humbling in a way I wasn't prepared for. But more than that, it's made me realize how much I've missed about who you really are. I've been so focused on maintaining my position as the family success story that I couldn't see your actual success happening right in front of me. The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the polished, confident sister I'd known all my life. This was someone wrestling with the collapse of a worldview she'd built her identity around. Sophia, you haven't failed at anything, I said gently. Your achievements are real and impressive. What you've accomplished in corporate America is genuinely difficult and valuable. But it's not what you've accomplished, she said. You've built something from nothing, created jobs, innovated in ways that caught the attention of major investors. You've done something I've never even attempted. We stood there for a moment, two sisters seeing each other clearly for perhaps the first time in decades. The competition that had defined our relationship suddenly seemed less important than the possibility of understanding each other. Maybe we've been measuring success wrong, I suggested. Maybe it's not about who achieves more, but about whether we're both building lives that matter to us. Sophia nodded slowly. I think you're right. And I think I owe you years of conversations I was too self-centered to have. The hug we shared felt different from any childhood embrace. It carried the weight of acknowledgement, apology, and the tentative beginning of a new dynamic between us. As I gathered my things to leave, my mother pulled me aside one more time. Maya, I hope you can forgive us for being so blind. We love you, and we're incredibly proud of what you've built. I just wish we'd been paying attention enough to support you while you were building it. There's nothing to forgive, I said, and I meant it. You couldn't celebrate something you didn't know existed. But maybe from now on, we can all be a little more curious about each other's lives. I drove home through the familiar streets of Westchester, but everything looked different now. The family gathering that had started as another exercise in polite endurance had transformed into something I'd never expected. Genuine recognition, honest conversation, and the beginning of relationships based on truth rather than assumption. My phone buzzed with a text from James. How did it go? Did you tell them about the funding? I smiled, thinking about how to summarize the morning's events. Better than expected. Turns out they're more interested in what I do when they realize it's actually successful. Family dynamics are weird, he replied. Ready to celebrate? 35 million deserves champagne. As I pulled into my parking space in Brooklyn, I realized something had shifted inside me, too. For years, I'd carried the weight of their dismissal, letting their lack of understanding affect how I saw my own achievements. But their validation, while deeply satisfying, wasn't what had made my work meaningful. The meaning had been there all along, in every perfectly risen loaf, every satisfied customer, every employee whose job let them support their family. Success didn't require an audience to be real, but it was nice, finally, to have one that could see it clearly. The next morning, I stood in the flagship bakery at 5 a.m., surrounded by the familiar sounds of industrial mixers and the complex aromas of fermenting dough. James was already there, working on production schedules for the new locations. So, he said without looking up from his spreadsheet, how does it feel to be the family success story now? I considered the question while I checked on my starter cultures, each one bubbling with the quiet life that had started this entire journey. Different than I expected, I admitted, but not as different than I thought it would be. Meaning the work is the same whether they understand it or not. The satisfaction is the same whether they celebrate it or dismiss it. The only thing that changed is that now family dinners might actually be enjoyable. James laughed.
That's probably worth $35 million right there. As the morning shift arrived and the bakery came to full life around us, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. I'd started with nothing but curiosity about wild yeast and a willingness to experiment with fermentation schedules. Along the way, I'd discovered that building something meaningful didn't require permission from people who couldn't see its value. What I hadn't expected was how quickly word would spread through my extended family network.
Within a week of that transformative Sunday brunch, my phone started ringing with calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about my business, my expansion plans, my investment strategy. The same people who had politely tolerated my presence at family gatherings were now eager to claim connection to my success. My cousin David called first, his voice bright with newfound enthusiasm. He was a financial advisor in Connecticut, and he wanted to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Perhaps his clients would be interested in investing in food industry ventures. Perhaps I needed someone to manage my personal wealth portfolio. Then came my Aunt Susan, who had always been particularly vocal about my need to find a more stable career. She was suddenly fascinated by entrepreneurship and wondered if I might consider mentoring her daughter, who was thinking about starting an online boutique. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same woman who had suggested I consider administrative assistant positions was now seeking business advice from me. The most surprising call came from my cousin Rachel, Sophia's closest ally throughout our childhood. Rachel had always been Sophia's echo, amplifying her achievements and quietly reinforcing the family narrative that positioned Sophia as the standard of success. Now she was calling to apologize for years of dismissive comments and to ask if I might be interested in catering her upcoming anniversary party. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: enthusiasm about my success, regret about past misunderstandings, and then a request for some form of connection to my business or expertise. It was flattering and exhausting in equal measure, this sudden transformation from family disappointment to family celebrity. But the call that truly surprised me came from my grandmother, Netta Rose, who lived in a retirement community in Florida. At 87, she had always been the family's emotional center, the one person who managed to love all of us without playing favorites or keeping score of our achievements. "Maya, sweetheart," her voice was warm but tired over the phone, "I heard about your wonderful news from your mother. I wanted to call and tell you how proud I am, but also how sorry I am." "Sorry for what, Nana?" "For not seeing what you were building all these years. Your mother tells me you've created something quite remarkable, and I realize I've been as blind as the rest of them." Her honesty touched something deep in my chest. "Nana, you've always been supportive. You never dismissed what I was doing. But I never asked the right questions either, did I? I treated your baking like a charming hobby instead of recognizing it as the serious pursuit it was. That's my generation's failing, I suppose. We thought we knew what success looked like, and we couldn't see it when it took a different form." The conversation with Nana stayed with me for days. Unlike the other calls, which felt motivated by self-interest or social obligation, her words carried the weight of genuine reflection and regret. She had always been the family member I felt closest to, the one who seemed to understand that people could find happiness and meaning in different ways. Meanwhile, at work, the reality of managing $35 million in investment funding was becoming clear. James and I spent long days in meetings with lawyers, accountants, and consultants, all working to structure the expansion in a way that would preserve the quality and culture that had made our original locations successful. The challenge was bigger than I'd anticipated. Opening 6 new bakeries wasn't just about finding locations and hiring staff. It meant developing management systems that could maintain our standards across multiple sites, training programs that could teach our fermentation techniques to new employees, and supply chain logistics that could deliver consistent ingredients to all our locations. James thrived in this environment, his systematic approach to problem solving perfectly suited to the complexity we were navigating. He created detailed operational manuals, designed training curricula, and built software systems that would allow us to monitor quality metrics across all our locations in real time. I found myself focusing more on the human elements of expansion. Each new location would need a head baker who understood not just the technical aspects of sourdough production, but the philosophy behind what we were doing. These weren't just employees, they were custodians of traditions and techniques that had taken me years to develop. The first candidate interviews were revealing.
Many applicants had impressive technical credentials, culinary school training, and experience at well-known bakeries. But when I asked them to explain what they understood about fermentation science or how they would handle the daily care of starter cultures, I often received answers that revealed fundamental misunderstandings about the work we did. One particularly qualified candidate, a pastry chef with 15 years of experience at high-end restaurants, confidently explained that he could improve our efficiency by using commercial yeast supplements to speed up fermentation times. When I gently explained that this would fundamentally change the character and quality of our products, he looked at me as if I were being unnecessarily difficult. Another candidate, a recent culinary school graduate with enthusiasm for artisanal techniques, seemed to understand our approach but couldn't explain the science behind it. When I asked her how she would troubleshoot a starter culture that was showing signs of contamination, she admitted she'd never actually maintained wild yeast cultures for extended periods. The hiring process made me realize how rare our expertise actually was. James and I had spent years developing techniques and understanding that couldn't be easily transferred or replicated. We weren't just scaling a business, we were trying to preserve and transmit a craft that existed in very few places. It was during this challenging period that I received an unexpected visitor at the Brooklyn Bakery. I was in the back kitchen, working on a new whole grain formula, when Maria, our front counter manager, came to find me. "Maya, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your sister, but she doesn't look like the sister who came in a few months ago." I was confused until I walked to the front and saw Sophia standing near the display case, looking genuinely nervous for the first time in memory. She was dressed more casually than usual, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her typical business attire. "Sophia, what are you doing here?" "I was hoping we could talk. I mean, really talk. Not at a family gathering with everyone watching, but just the two of us." I gestured toward a small table in the corner of the cafe area. "Of course. Can I get you coffee? Something to eat?" "Coffee would be nice." She settled into the chair, looking around the bakery with genuine curiosity. "Maya, this place is beautiful. It's not what I expected." I brought 2 cups of coffee and a selection of pastries, settling across from her.
What did you expect? I don't know. Something smaller. Maybe more rustic. This feels professional. Serious. Like a real business. She paused, seeming to hear her own words. "I'm sorry. That came out wrong. I'm still adjusting to seeing what you've built. It's okay. Most people have preconceptions about bakeries. They think artisanal means amateur, or that caring about quality means sacrificing efficiency." Sophia picked up a croissant, examining its layers with new appreciation. "Can I ask you something? When did you realize this could be more than a hobby? When did you know you could build something this significant?" The question was more complex than she probably realized. "I think there were several moments," I said slowly. "The first was when I realized I could control fermentation variables well enough to get consistent results. The second was when I understood that most commercial bakeries were sacrificing quality for convenience, and most artisanal bakeries were sacrificing consistency for romance. I saw an opportunity to do both well. But when did you know it could be this big?" I thought about the long nights spent perfecting recipes, the early mornings at farmers markets, the gradual realization that demand for our products was outpacing my ability to supply them. Honestly, I didn't know it could be this big until it already was. I was just trying to solve one problem at a time, serve one customer at a time, improve one process at a time. Sophia nodded, but I could see she was struggling with something. "Maya, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it completely before you respond." I waited, sensing this was important. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about how I position myself as the practical one and you as the dreamer, and I realized something that's been hard to accept." She paused, gathering courage. "I think I was threatened by your passion." "Threatened how?" "You cared so deeply about what you were doing. You would talk about fermentation schedules and flour proteins with this intensity, this genuine fascination. And I think part of me was jealous of that passion because I've never felt that way about anything. The admission surprised me. Sophia had always seemed so confident in her career choices, so satisfied with her achievements. I chose marketing because I was good at it, and it paid well. I chose my company because they offered the best advancement opportunities. I've made every career decision based on external metrics of success, but I've never done anything because I couldn't imagine not doing it. Sophia, there's nothing wrong with being strategic about your career. You've achieved impressive things. But have I? She asked. I mean, yes, I have a good job and make good money and get promoted regularly. But what have I actually built? What would happen to my achievements if I left my company tomorrow? The question hung between us, heavy with implications I wasn't sure how to address. When I started understanding what you've created, she said, I realized the difference between having a successful career and building something meaningful. You've created jobs for 43 people. You've developed techniques that other bakers will learn and use. You've built something that will exist beyond your presence in it. Your work matters too, I said gently. Marketing campaigns connect products with people who need them. You help companies communicate their value to customers. But I don't own any of that value. I'm a very well-paid employee, but I'm still just an employee. You're an owner, a creator, an innovator. The difference is bigger than I wanted to admit. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping coffee and watching the afternoon customers browse our display cases. It occurred to me that this might be the first truly honest conversation Sophia and I had ever had as adults. Can I ask you something now? I said. Of course. Why did it take a $35 million investment for our family to take my work seriously? Why wasn't the fact that I was passionate about it and good at it enough to merit genuine interest? Sophia considered the question carefully. I think because we were measuring everything by external validation. Your work didn't fit into categories we understood, so we dismissed it instead of trying to understand it. But also, she continued, I think some of us were invested in seeing you as the impractical dreamer because it made us feel better about our own practical choices. If you succeeded by following your passion, it raised uncomfortable questions about whether we were following ours. The insight was more perceptive than I had expected from Sophia. So, my failure was necessary for your confidence in your own choices. Not consciously, but maybe unconsciously? Yes. It's easier to feel good about choosing security over passion if you can point to someone whose passion led to nowhere. Except my passion didn't lead to nowhere. No, it led somewhere extraordinary.
And now I have to reconsider everything I thought I knew about risk, passion, and what it means to build a meaningful life. Our conversation was interrupted by a familiar voice calling my name. I turned to see Marcus Williams, the executive chef from Le Bernardin, walking toward our table with a warm smile. Maya, perfect timing. I was hoping to catch you. He nodded politely to Sophia before turning back to me. I have some exciting news about our collaboration. Marcus, I'd like you to meet my sister, Sophia. Sophia, this is Marcus Williams from Le Bernardin. Sophia's eyes widened with recognition. The Le Bernardin? The restaurant where I celebrated my promotion last month? Marcus smiled. Small world. I hope you enjoyed your meal. Maya, we've finalized the contract terms for your bread service. Starting next month, we'll be featuring your sourdough with our lunch menu, and we're planning a special dinner that highlights fermentation techniques across multiple courses. Your bread will be a featured component. I felt heat creep up my neck. Having Marcus discuss business in front of Sophia felt surreal, like watching two separate parts of my life collide in unexpected ways. That sounds wonderful, I managed. I'll review the contract details with James this week. Excellent. I also wanted to let you know that several other chefs have been asking about your availability. Word travels fast in our community, and there's significant interest in what you're doing. After Marcus left, Sophia sat staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Maya? Did the executive chef from one of the most prestigious restaurants in New York just discuss featuring your bread in a special dinner? It appears so. And this is normal for you now? Celebrity chefs seeking you out for collaborations? I laughed, still adjusting to this reality myself. It's new, but yes, I suppose it's becoming normal. The food world is smaller than you might think. When you develop a reputation for quality and innovation, word spreads quickly. Sophia shook her head in amazement. 6 months ago, I was feeling sorry for you because you were still playing with bread dough. Today, I'm sitting here realizing that you're operating at a level I never imagined possible. 6 months ago, you weren't wrong to feel that way, I said. This level of recognition is recent. The business success has been building for years, but the industry acknowledgement is new. But you were doing the same work 6 months ago that you're doing now. Exactly. The work didn't change. The perception of it changed. We talked for another hour, covering topics we'd never discussed as adults. Sophia asked detailed questions about fermentation science, business strategy, and the daily challenges of managing multiple locations. For the first time, she seemed genuinely curious about my world, rather than trying to fit it into categories she already understood. As she prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. Maya, would it be okay if I came back sometime? Not for a specific reason, just to spend time here, to understand better what you've built? Of course, you're always welcome. And maybe we could have dinner soon, just the two of us. I feel like we have a lot of catching up to do. After she left, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically our relationship had shifted in just 1 week. For most of our lives, Sophia had been the family member I felt most distant from, the one whose success made my choices seem small by comparison. Now she was the one seeking connection, trying to understand my world, questioning her own assumptions about success and meaning. The next few weeks brought a series of developments that would test everything we'd built. Our first new location, scheduled to open in Manhattan's Upper West Side, encountered unexpected permitting delays that pushed our opening back by 6 weeks. The head baker we'd hired for the Queens expansion quit suddenly, citing personal reasons, but leaving us scrambling to maintain production schedules. Most challenging was a contamination issue at our New Jersey location that required us to discard 3 days' worth of starter cultures and sterilize the entire production area. The financial loss was manageable, but the setback reminded me how fragile our quality standards could be when scaled across multiple locations. James handled the crisis management with characteristic calm, but I could see the stress wearing on him. We were learning that growth created vulnerabilities we'd never faced as a single-location business. It was during this difficult period that I received a call that would change everything again. Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the Food and Agriculture Institute at Cornell University was reaching out about a research collaboration opportunity. Ms. Chen, I've been following your work with great interest. Her voice was warm but professional. We are launching a multi-year study on sustainable fermentation techniques, and we believe your methods could provide crucial insights for the broader food industry. I'm flattered, Dr. Rodriguez, but I'm not sure how much academic value our techniques would have. On the contrary, your approach to scaling artisanal fermentation while maintaining quality metrics is exactly what we need to study. There are applications beyond bakeries that could revolutionize food production on a much larger scale. The conversation that followed opened my eyes to possibilities I'd never considered.
The techniques James and I had developed for maintaining starter cultures and controlling fermentation variables had potential applications in everything from cheese production to winemaking to pharmaceutical manufacturing. Dr. Rodriguez was proposing a formal partnership in which Cornell would study our methods in exchange for helping us develop even more sophisticated quality control systems. The research would be published, potentially establishing new industry standards for artisanal food production. The implications go beyond food, she explained. Controlled fermentation has applications in biotechnology, environmental science, even space exploration. NASA is interested in sustainable food production methods for long-duration missions. I found myself in the strange position of having built something with broader significance than I'd understood. What had started as a passionate pursuit of perfect bread had apparently contributed to scientific knowledge with applications I'd never imagined. The meeting with Dr. Rodriguez took place the following week at Cornell's campus in Ithaca. James and I drove up together, both nervous about presenting our work to academic researchers who might find our methods unrigorous or unscientific. Instead, we found a group of food scientists genuinely excited about our innovations. Dr. Rodriguez introduced us to her team, explaining that our temperature control systems and fermentation monitoring protocols represented significant advances in applied food science. What you've developed empirically, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, a fermentation specialist, aligns perfectly with theoretical models we've been working on for years. The fact that you've proven these concepts work at commercial scale is exactly what the research community needs. The day included presentations, lab tours, and detailed discussions about how a formal collaboration might work. By the end, I was overwhelmed by the possibilities, but also daunted by the responsibility. I need to be honest with you, I told Dr. Rodriguez as we wrapped up. James and I are flattered by this opportunity, but we're in the middle of a major business expansion. I'm not sure we have the bandwidth to take on a research partnership right now. We understand completely, she replied, but consider this. The research partnership could actually support your expansion goals. We have graduate students who could help with quality control monitoring, equipment that could improve your testing capabilities, and expertise that could solve some of the scaling challenges you're facing. The drive back to New York was quiet as James and I processed what we'd learned. The opportunity was extraordinary, but it also represented another layer of complexity in our already challenging expansion. What do you think? I asked as we passed through Syracuse. I think it's incredible, James said slowly, but I also think we need to be realistic about what we can handle. We're already stretching ourselves thin with the bakery expansion. But the research could help us solve some of our scaling problems, and the credibility of a Cornell partnership could open doors we haven't even considered. True, it could also distract us from our core business and turn us into a research project instead of a profitable company. We spent the rest of the drive discussing pros and cons, but by the time we reached Brooklyn, I knew what my gut was telling me. The research opportunity aligned too perfectly with our long-term goals to pass up. That evening, I called Dr. Rodriguez to accept the partnership offer. The news of our Cornell collaboration spread quickly through industry networks. Within days, I was fielding calls from food science publications wanting to interview me about our techniques. James found himself invited to speak at conferences about applied fermentation technology. Most surprising was a call from the producers of a Food Network documentary series about food innovation. They wanted to feature our story as part of a show about entrepreneurs who were revolutionizing traditional food production. We're looking for stories that illustrate how passion and science can come together to create something transformative, explained the producer, Jennifer Walsh. Your journey from starter hobbyist to multi-million-dollar business owner and now to research partner is exactly the kind of narrative our audience connects with. I was hesitant about television exposure, worried that it might oversimplify or sensationalize the work we did, but James pointed out that the visibility could help with our expansion goals and might inspire other food entrepreneurs to pursue their own innovative approaches. The filming took place over 3 days, with camera crews capturing everything from our daily starter maintenance routines to strategic planning meetings with our Cornell partners. Jennifer Walsh turned out to be a thoughtful interviewer who understood the technical aspects of our work well enough to ask meaningful questions. The most challenging part of the filming was the family interview segment. The producers wanted to include my family's perspective on my transformation from dismissed dreamer to successful entrepreneur. The interview took place at my parents' house, with my mother, father, and Sophia sharing their thoughts on camera.
Watching them try to explain their earlier dismissiveness while expressing current pride was uncomfortable for everyone involved. "We always knew Maya was talented," my mother said carefully, "but I think we didn't understand the scope of what she was building." My father was more direct. "I'll be honest, we thought she was wasting her potential on a hobby that would never support her financially. We were wrong, obviously, but our concerns came from love and worry about her future." Sophia's interview was the most revealing. "I think our family, like many families, had very narrow definitions of success. We could recognize achievement when it looked like corporate advancement or professional recognition, but we couldn't see it when it took the form of craft mastery and business innovation." The documentary aired 6 months later, generating more attention than any of us had anticipated. The episode titled "From Starter to Empire" became one of the most watched in the series' history. The response was overwhelming. Our website crashed from traffic, our phone rang constantly with media requests, and several major food companies reached out for potential partnerships or acquisitions. Most personally meaningful were the messages from other food entrepreneurs who had been inspired by the story. Dozens of people wrote to share their own journeys of building businesses around traditional food techniques, often in the face of family skepticism or industry dismissal. One message particularly moved me. It came from a young woman named Sarah, who had been developing fermented hot sauce recipes in her apartment kitchen while working as a restaurant server. Her family had been pressuring her to give up her sauce hobby and focus on finding a stable office job. "Watching your story gave me the courage to keep going," she wrote. "If you could build what you built, starting with just sourdough starter and a dream, maybe I can build something meaningful too." I realized that our success had become more than just a business achievement. It had become a symbol of possibility for anyone who had been told their passion was too impractical to pursue professionally. The documentary's success also brought unexpected challenges. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know the secret formulas behind our starter cultures, the exact specifications of our fermentation systems, the detailed business strategies that had led to our growth. Some competitors began claiming to use similar techniques, though without the years of experimentation and refinement that had made our methods effective. We found ourselves in the position of protecting intellectual property we'd never intended to commercialize beyond our own operations. More concerning were the inevitable attempts to franchise or license our brand. Investment groups approached us weekly with proposals to rapidly expand our concept across the country or internationally. The offers were financially attractive, but would have required compromising the quality control that made our products special. James and I spent long hours discussing how to handle this new level of attention and opportunity. We could capitalize on our fame to grow quickly and perhaps become very wealthy in the process. Or we could stay focused on sustainable growth that preserved the craft-based values that had gotten us this far. The decision became clear during a particularly intense meeting with a private equity group that wanted to acquire our company for a sum that would have made us both independently wealthy for life. Their business plan called for opening 200 locations within 3 years, using simplified production methods and standardized ingredients to ensure consistency. "We understand that this would represent a significant change from your current artisanal approach," the lead investor explained, "but the market opportunity for scaled artisanal bread is enormous. You could bring your products to millions of customers instead of thousands." "What would happen to our starter cultures?" I asked. "Would each location maintain their own wild yeast cultures?" "Oh, we'd standardize that process," he replied dismissively. "Commercial yeast blends that replicate your flavor profiles but with much more predictable results. Customers won't be able to tell the difference, but production will be much more efficient." James and I exchanged glances. They were essentially proposing to buy our brand and reputation in order to mass-produce imitations of our products using industrial methods. "Thank you for the offer," I said politely, "but I don't think this partnership would align with our values or goals." After they left, James and I sat in our Brooklyn office, reflecting on what we'd just turned down: $50 million, immediate national expansion, and the kind of business success that would have impressed even the most skeptical family members. Any regrets? James asked. I looked out the window at our flagship bakery, where I could see our afternoon shift carefully tending to the starter cultures that had been the foundation of everything we'd built. None at all, I said. Some things are worth more than money. The months that followed brought steady, sustainable growth as we opened new locations according to our original timeline. Each new bakery was staffed by bakers we'd trained personally, using equipment we'd tested extensively, following protocols we refined over years of experimentation. Our Cornell research partnership began producing published papers that established new standards for artisanal food production. The work was technical and detailed, but it validated the scientific rigor behind methods we'd developed through intuition and experimentation. Most satisfying was watching our employees grow into leadership roles as we expanded. Maria, who had started as our front counter manager, became operations director for our tri-state locations. David, our first full-time baker, was now head of training and quality control. These promotions weren't just good business, they represented the kind of meaningful work culture that had always been part of our vision. We were creating not just jobs, but careers. Not just employment, but opportunities for people to master valuable skills and build professional lives around craft and quality. The family dynamics that had been so dramatically altered by my business success continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Sophia left her corporate marketing job to start her own consulting practice, focusing on helping small food businesses develop their brand strategies. I realized I wanted to work with people who were building something they cared about, she explained when she told me about her career change. Corporate marketing is fine, but helping passionate entrepreneurs communicate their vision feels more meaningful. Her first client was Sarah, the hot sauce entrepreneur who had written to me after the documentary aired. Sophia helped her develop packaging and marketing strategies that honored the artisanal nature of her products while appealing to broader markets. My parents began visiting our bakeries regularly, not just as proud family members, but as genuine customers who had developed appreciation for artisanal bread. My father even started maintaining a small sourdough starter at home, following instructions I'd written for beginners. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness as we all adjusted to new family dynamics. But there was also a depth of connection that hadn't existed before, based on mutual respect and genuine understanding, rather than obligation and assumption. One evening, as I was closing the Brooklyn bakery after a particularly busy day, I found myself alone with the starter cultures that had started everything. Beatrice and her companions bubbled quietly in their temperature-controlled environment, the same living ecosystems that had fascinated me years earlier when I was just a curious home baker with more passion than business sense. Looking at them, I realized that the most important thing hadn't changed. The work itself, the daily devotion to craft and quality, the satisfaction of creating something meaningful with simple ingredients and careful attention, that remained exactly the same, whether I was baking for farmers market customers or supplying prestigious restaurants. Success had brought recognition, financial security, and opportunities I'd never imagined, but it hadn't changed the fundamental joy of the work itself. If anything, having the resources to pursue excellence without compromise had made the craft even more satisfying. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Dinner tomorrow? I want to hear about the new research project." I smiled, typing back, "Absolutely, I'll bring bread." Some things I thought never change, and some things change everything. The art was learning to tell the difference. 5 years later, I stood before a congressional subcommittee testifying about sustainable food production. The same techniques my family had once mocked were now being considered for national policy recommendations. Sophia sat in the gallery, her consulting firm now representing 12 artisanal food companies. She had found her own version of meaningful work, helping passionate creators communicate their vision to the world. The circle had completed itself in ways none of us could have predicted. What began as one woman's stubborn devotion to wild yeast had become a catalyst for industry change, family transformation, and personal fulfillment that defied every conventional measure of success.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.